Hey guys, this is going to be the Chapter 19 review. I apologize for getting this out a little bit later than I wanted to. My computer screen broke earlier this week, so I just now got a replacement computer. But nonetheless, I'm just going to be real brief in this lecture, go over the main points of really what we've been learning since we've been out of school, and then we'll be jumping in to the 1930s and the Great Depression in Chapter 20. So, I did a lecture on this post-war havoc, talking about the first Red Scare. That was U.S. fear of communism. So if you guys remember, the Russians actually pulled out of World War One before it was over. In 1917, um, Russia decides that they need to focus more on internal affairs. There's a lot of turmoil and politics. You have the Russian Revolution, where the Bolsheviks actually rise up against the Tsar, which is like the king of Russia. They rise up, overthrow him, and a man by the name of Vladimir Lenin takes power over Russia. And in a few short years, Russia will become what is known as the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union doesn't collapse until the late 80s. But anyhow, Vladimir Lenin promoted communism. He had studied a man by the name of Karl Marx, who was a um, avid socialist in uh, Germany, or I believe he may have been from Austria, but nonetheless, he believed in the ideas of communism, and pretty much that means there's no economic classes, there's no private property, and everybody would get an equal share of the wealth of the nation. So you couldn't, per se, like we have here in America, you couldn't own your own property, you couldn't own your own house, your land, you couldn't own your own car, nothing like that. Um, Also, you know how in America we have low, middle, and high class. That's not the way it would be under communism. The wealthy would have to give up some of their wealth, the poor would get more, and then the middle class would be where everybody, or the ultimate goal for all citizens, to be at that middle class. Um, and then all wealth was supposed to be shared equally, and this leads to a lot of problems. It sounds kind of nice, everybody's treated equal, but in the long term, it really doesn't carry out in the way that Lenin really wanted it to. And Lenin, when he dies, he creates a power vacuum, and a young man, a military man by the name of Joseph Stalin, you've probably heard of him from World War II, will take power over Russia. But in the United States, we're having labor strikes, and this scares politicians. It scares the average American because it looks like the United States, with these labor strikes, may be following suit like with what Russia was doing. It started in the factories in Russia, that revolution. And so they didn't want that to happen here. And so you get, these labor strikes playing in to the Red Scare. And ultimately, these labor strikes do a little bit. They do help to get some safer working conditions, but ultimately, they really don't get their demands met because the U.S. government gets involved in shutting down many of these labor strikes. And then also we have the limiting of immigration. Probably the toughest the United States ever limited immigration was during this time period, because we have, right after the war, scarcity for jobs. Remember, you have a lot of people coming back, or a lot of soldiers coming back to the United States, and they're competing for jobs with the people who had, filled their place when they left for war. And in turn, the U.S. passes a bill which limits immigration to 2% of that country's population. So just say a country, has 200,000 people. Well, only 20,000 out of that would get to come, or actually, no, sorry, 2,000 out of that would get to come into the United States. So only 2% of a country's population would be allowed to immigrate at a time. So once that was up, no more immigrants could come from that country for the rest of the year. And also, we see the rise of nativism, kind of a hatred towards immigrants coming into the country during this time as well. We do see, on a little bit more of a positive note, um, a new economic era and new ways of production. Of course, you guys read about Henry Ford and his assembly line. that will increase production by 60%. And production is basically just how much you can produce in a certain amount of time. So it takes a lot less time to produce more products. And so this drastically reduces the cost of items that were once only available to the wealthy. Things like washing machines, nice cars, all these things are now available to the average American because of the assembly line making them so much cheaper. And this industry changes society. We see, the average family having its own car. The idea of the family having a car, the idea of living in suburbs. Suburbs spring up during this time. Now that you have an automobile, you don't have to live right in the middle of town. You can live on the outskirts of town and commute to work. What a lot of people do today. Also, like I said, washing machines, refrigerators. Most houses will get electricity during the 1920s, and with that comes, all of the appliances that we enjoy in our houses today. And this leads to new consumers. So we have consumers of the middle class, or even in some cases, kind of lower middle class, buying into these extras, things that you really don't, that aren't necessities, but they're nice to have. Things that the rich really only spent money on. Now you have all Americans, or most Americans, spending money on these luxury goods. And there's a weakness. There's a hidden part of this economic boom. And you see there with the little advertisement that says buy now, pay later. And we even hear that still today. But the idea was, you come in, you pick out, the fanciest washing machine, you take it home, but you're just going to keep making these small payments, for not forever, but for years on end until you can pay that washing machine off. And so, you know, at this time, people were like, "Oh man, look, I can get these shiny new gadgets. I can get the best new car, and I only got to make these little payments every month." They weren't thinking about the long-term effects. How you really end up paying a lot more for an item if you buy it that way. Also, a big problem, and you can see here with I have a picture of the stock market crash in 1929. And really, what causes this crash and what causes the Great Depression to be so bad is people had been buying stocks on what is called buying stock on margin. And it's essentially you're buying stock with credit. And we've talked about before, way back when we were, still in class, we talked about how, when you have a stock, you can never lose. You can lose what you invested, but you'll never end up owing money. So you buy a stock for $20, that company goes out of business, there's nothing left, and you just lost your $20. But you can't ever end up owing like $30 because you can't go into debt. You can just lose what you put in. But when you buy that, say I took a loan out for that $20, well, even though, I've lost my initial $20 that I put in, I still owe, whoever I borrowed that $20 from, I still owe them that $20. And so this plunges the stock market because it really was artificially inflated. That money wasn't there. It was all being borrowed. So um, it was, built on a flimsy market anyhow. And once, people lose faith and it crashes, then, that's when we see the Great Depression, which we'll talk more about in the next chapter. But then we have the two presidents, Harding and Coolidge. You read a little bit about these two presidents. Kind of the same, a little bit different. Different in personality, same in policies. President Harding, he was, more of a joking guy, very charismatic, and he really didn't, have a hands-on approach to governing. He thought that the government should be limited, let big business do what it needed to do in order to expand the economy. But probably one of the biggest parts of Harding's presidency is people liked him, but he did appoint some people to lower ranks of government that were marked with corruption. And the biggest one being the Teapot Dome scandal. And you can see a picture of the Teapot Dome down there in the bottom right. And the Teapot Dome scandal, essentially what happened is one of Harding's cabinet members took a bribe from an oil company for that oil company to get the rights to drill on federal lands out in Wyoming, out at Teapot Dome. And so obviously you can't do that. That's bribery, and the cabinet member was convicted and did go to jail. But really, Harding dies before he gets to see many of these scandals come to light, or a lot of the scandals from his presidency show up. He actually was going on a trip to Alaska, was campaigning, fell a little sick. They thought he had indigestion, and he ends up having a heart attack and dying the next day. And once he dies, that's when Calvin Coolidge comes in, his vice president. And Coolidge is really the right man to shore up everybody's skepticism of the Harding cabinet, because Coolidge was a well-respected man. He had built a reputation as an honest or more honest politician, and so he fires all the people that were involved in the scandal. He again is similar to President Harding, hands-off approach to big business. Let big business do what it needs to do to expand the economy. Tax breaks for big business was one of the big things that Coolidge and Harding both did. Harding will run um, at the end, I think it's 1924, he will run for president and win. So he serves, I believe, 2 years after Harding dies, and then he wins on his own right, and then he serves another 4 years, but he decides not to run in 1928. And then probably the main thing that we need to remember with all this happening, the society changing in the United States. The United States is doing fairly well, but Europe is still feeling the effects of World War One. And so what had happened is Europe had borrowed somewhere around $10 billion from the United States to pay for its war effort. And once the war is over, they got to start repaying that money. But the United States had enacted high tariffs on European goods, so that way we could, produce more. People would buy American-made products, um, and so they couldn't sell their products here. They didn't have a big market. They couldn't come up with the money, and the solution that Britain and France came up with is, well, we're going to charge Germany higher reparations. We're going to charge them more money for you know war damage to help pay back this debt. And so Germany gets paid or charged these super high reparations, and they can't pay them. So lo and behold, the United States says, "Oh, you can't pay them? Here's a loan." So they give Germany a loan. They're getting paid back by Britain and France. Germany's going deeper into debt, and all this time it's crashing the German economy. The German economy will be the depression there will be even worse than it is in the United States. I mean, the dollar will become intrinsically worthless. And what this does is, for one, it makes the United States strong. It makes the United States, quote unquote, the banker of Europe, but it crushes Germany, and it paves the way for German distress. The German people are looking for a way out, and unfortunately, they'll find that in a young politician by the name of Adolf Hitler, who takes power in the late 1930s. So I hope you guys found this helpful. Email me if you have any questions. Make sure you study for your quiz, and have a good week.